The moment I found the folded note slipped under my hotel room door, I almost threw it away without reading it. We were 3 hours from the ceremony, and my best friend of 17 years was somewhere down the hall of this Napa Valley Vineyard resort, probably having her hair pinned up by the stylist we'd spent 2 months researching together. I'd been the one to find this venue. I'd driven 4 hours to tour it with her on a Tuesday afternoon, sipping complimentary Chardonnay while she stood on the terrace and cried happy tears because it was exactly what she'd always imagined. I'd listened to those happy tears. I'd handed her a tissue and told her this was going to be the most beautiful day of her life. I almost threw that note away. Instead, I set down my mascara, picked it up from the cream-colored carpet, and unfolded it with the kind of casual curiosity you have when you assume it's a schedule change from the venue coordinator. The handwriting was blocky, deliberately disguised, like someone pressing too hard to keep their own penmanship from showing through. Before you give your toast tonight, check your husband's work bag. The front zip pocket. I'm sorry you have to find out this way. I read it twice. Then I sat on the edge of the hotel bed in my robe, the note balanced on my knee, and stared at the pale yellow wall until the color stopped making sense. My husband had driven up separately the night before. A work call had kept him at the office until nearly 9, so I'd come ahead with the other bridesmaids, laughing and sharing a charcuterie board in my best friend's suite while he promised to make the rehearsal dinner by dessert. He'd slipped in just as the toasts were winding down, smelling like the cedar cologne I'd given him last Christmas, kissing my cheek in the way that had become automatic over 6 years of marriage. His work bag was sitting on the luggage rack across the room. Dark navy canvas with worn leather straps. I'd given it to him as an anniversary gift 3 years ago, had it monogrammed with his initials. I didn't move toward it right away. I sat with the note and let myself breathe, the way my therapist had taught me to do when anxiety spiked without obvious cause. Breathe, observe, don't react until you understand what you're reacting to. Someone was trying to rattle me on my best friend's wedding day. That was the rational explanation. A prank. A jealous guest. Someone who wanted to create chaos out of spite. But something in my chest had already gone cold and quiet in the specific way that meant a deeper part of me already knew. The front zip pocket opened with a soft metallic rasp. There was a hotel keycard inside. Not ours. This one had the logo of a boutique hotel in Sacramento, the kind of place with dimly lit bars and rooms that don't ask questions. Tucked behind the keycard was a receipt, folded small, from that same hotel. The date was 11 weeks ago. Room service for 2. A bottle of wine I recognized as my best friend's favorite, the one she always ordered at restaurants when she was celebrating something. My hands were remarkably steady as I kept searching. At the very bottom of the pocket, I found a photograph. Not printed from a phone but an actual developed photograph, the kind you get from one of those novelty instant cameras. My best friend had bought one of those cameras for her bachelorette trip to Charleston 2 months ago. I'd seen the photos from that trip. She'd posted them online in a little gallery, everyone laughing and sunburned and holding cocktails on the rooftop of a bar. She'd told me it was the best weekend of her life. In the photo I was holding, she wasn't on a rooftop. She was sitting in what looked like a hotel room, legs folded beneath her on a bed, and she was laughing at something off camera with her head thrown back in the way I knew meant she felt completely safe, completely herself. My husband's hand was visible at the edge of the frame, reaching toward her. The kind of reach that doesn't happen between people who are only friends. I set the photograph face down on the nightstand. The reasonable thing would have been to call him. To knock on my best friend's door. To confront both of them immediately and loudly with the evidence in my hand. But somewhere between reading that note and finding the photograph, something had shifted in me. The panic I expected never fully arrived. What came instead was something colder and far more focused. Because my best friend wasn't just getting married today. She was marrying a man who adored her genuinely, completely, without condition. A man who had moved across the country for her, who had learned to cook her mother's recipes, who cried at their engagement party speech and didn't care who saw. He deserved to know what I now knew before he stood at an altar and promised his life to someone who had spent months lying to both of us. I got dressed carefully, navy wrap dress, the good earrings. I did my makeup slowly, each step deliberate, because I needed my hands to stop trembling before I could do anything useful with them. I photographed the hotel key card, the receipt, and the photo with my phone from multiple angles in clear light. I put everything back exactly where I'd found it. I zipped the pocket closed. Then I sat down and thought about what I actually knew and what I needed to understand before the ceremony. I knew there had been a hotel stay. I knew there was a photo. I knew someone had gone out of their way to make sure I found this before the wedding, not after. That last piece mattered. Whoever slipped that note under my door wasn't trying to destroy anything. They were trying to stop something. The ceremony was at 4 o'clock. It was 11:45 in the morning. I texted my husband and told him I needed help with something in the room. He appeared 8 minutes later in his dress shirt, tie hanging loose around his collar, looking relaxed and handsome and entirely unsuspecting. I watched him come through the door and tried to locate some of the warmth I'd felt for him for years. I found mostly a hollow where it used to be. "Someone left this under our door," I said, and handed him the note. I watched his face the way you watch a building for structural cracks. The initial confusion was real. The second read-through was slower, and something shifted in his expression, not fear exactly, but a kind of collapsing inward, like a person bracing for impact they know they deserve. "Who sent this?" His voice was careful. "I was hoping you could tell me." "Babe, don't." The word came out quieter than I intended, which made it hit harder. "I found the keycard. The receipt. The photo." He sat down on the end of the bed and I watched 6 years of marriage rearrange itself across his face. He went through the stages quickly. Denial hovering just at the surface and then retreating because he could see I had already been through the pocket, already had the photographs on my phone. Then something that might have been relief, the terrible relief of someone who has been carrying a secret so long that exposure actually loosens something in them. He told me it had started 7 months ago. A work trip where they'd ended up at the same conference. She was there representing a client. He was there for a tech summit. They'd shared a hotel bar for 3 hours on a Wednesday night. He said it as though the geography explained something. As though Wednesday nights and hotel bars were forces outside his control. I didn't cry. I noticed this about myself with a kind of detached curiosity. "Does she love him?" I asked. "The man she's marrying today. Does she actually love him?" The pause before he answered was its own kind of answer. "I don't know what she feels," he finally said. "She told me the engagement was already in motion when she said she was going to end things. She kept saying she was going to end things. But she didn't." "No." I picked up my bag and my phone. "I need you to stay in this room," I said. "I'll come back when it's done." He looked up. "When what's done?" I didn't answer him. My best friend's bridal suite was 3 doors down the hall. I could hear music playing softly through the door, something she loved, a playlist I recognized because I'd listened to her build it. I knocked in her maid of honor, a woman I'd always liked, opened the door with a bright smile that softened when she saw my expression. "Can I have 5 minutes alone with her?" I said. "It's important." The suite cleared out with a kind of graceful efficiency. The stylist gathered her tools. The maid of honor ushered the 2 other bridesmaids into the hallway with a quiet authority I was grateful for. And then it was just the 2 of us, and she was standing in front of the mirror in her dress, which was genuinely beautiful ivory and structured and perfect for her. And she was looking at my reflection with an expression that was trying very hard to stay neutral. "You look pale," she said. "Did something happen?" "I need to show you something," I said. "And I need you to sit down first." She sat. I put my phone on the vanity table in front of her with the photos pulled up. The hotel keycard photographed clearly. The receipt with her favorite wine listed right there in the middle of the room service order. The photograph from the instant camera. She looked at the screen for a long time without speaking. "I'm not going to pretend I don't know what those are," she said finally. "Then don't." She closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were wet. But she wasn't crying, not quite yet. "I ended it 2 months ago. I swear to you I ended it. The receipt is from 11 weeks ago. I know when it was." Her voice cracked on the last word. "I know. I handled it terribly. I handled all of it terribly." She looked up at me and I saw something in her face that I hadn't expected to see. Not the guilt I'd been anticipating, but something rawer, more frightened. "Does he know?" "My husband is in our room." "Not him." Her voice dropped. "Does my fiancé know?" And that was when I understood the question she was actually asking. She wasn't asking me to protect herself. She was asking whether the man who had moved across the country for her, who had learned her mother's recipes, who had cried at their engagement party, was going to walk into a ceremony today with no idea what had happened. She was asking because she already knew he deserved better. and the knowing of it had been eating her alive. "Not yet," I said. "I have to tell him." The words came out like something she'd been holding underwater for months. "I have to tell him before I can't do this to him. I can't." I hadn't expected this. I'd come into this room prepared for denial, for anger, for her to paint me as the villain of the story. I hadn't prepared for her to already know exactly what needed to happen. "Are you sure?" I asked, because I needed to hear her say it again. "I've been sure for 2 months," she said quietly. "I just wasn't brave enough." She took off her veil, set it on the vanity table with the careful precision of someone handling something that matters. She looked at herself in the mirror for a moment, in her beautiful dress, in this beautiful room, with the vineyard rolling out golden and perfect beyond the windows. Then she picked up her phone and called him. I stepped out into the hallway to give her privacy. I sat on a small bench against the wall and listened to the muffled sound of their voices through the door. His rising with confusion, then with pain, then going quiet. I didn't cry in the hallway either. I noticed this again. When he came out, he almost walked past me. Then he stopped and turned, and we looked at each other in the particular way of two people who have just had their understanding of everything rearranged in the same hour. "I'm sorry," I said. He nodded once. His eyes were red, but his jaw was set in a way that reminded me of someone deciding not to fall apart just yet. "She told me everything. Or enough." He exhaled slowly. "You didn't have to come find me. You could have just let it happen." "No," I said. "I really couldn't." He sat down on the bench beside me. We stayed there for a while, not saying much, in the way that sometimes two people who have been handed the same loss can sit together without needing to explain it. The guests had to be told. The venue coordinator, a composed woman named Diane who had almost certainly seen everything in her years of managing weddings, handled the announcement with remarkable grace. A change of circumstances. The ceremony would not be proceeding. The venue would provide full refunds for the catering deposits. And she was very sorry for the inconvenience. The sound of 110 guests processing this news from the other side of the terrace doors was something I will remember for a long time. My husband found me in the vineyard gardens an hour later, where I'd walked to get air. The rows of dormant vines stretched out in both directions, bare and orderly in the thin winter light, and there was something appropriate about standing among things stripped down to their essential structure. "She called me," he said. He meant my best friend. "She told me she was the one who ended it. She said she was sorry." "She is sorry," I said. "That doesn't fix anything." "I know." We stood in the vineyard for a long time. I told him what I knew, which was that I didn't want things to go back to how they'd been, because how they'd been had apparently included something I hadn't been allowed to see. He didn't argue. He didn't try to negotiate. He just listened, and at the end he said that he understood, and that he was sorry, and that he would do whatever I needed him to do. What I needed, I told him, was space and honesty, and time to figure out whether there was anything left worth rebuilding. He nodded. He went back inside and booked himself a separate room for the night. I stayed in the garden a little longer. 3 days after I got home, I figured out who had slipped the note under my door. It was a woman who worked at my husband's company. Not a close colleague, but someone who'd been at that same conference in Sacramento. Someone who had seen them together in the hotel bar that night and recognized immediately what she was looking at. She'd spent 7 months carrying the weight of knowing, trying to decide whether it was her business to say anything, going back and forth until she found out the wedding was in 2 weeks and made up her mind. She left a message on my phone, halting and careful, explaining all of this. She said she'd almost talked herself out of it a dozen times. She said she hoped she'd done the right thing. I called her back and told her she had. The things that surprised me most in the months that followed were the small things. How quiet my apartment was once my husband moved his things out, and how the quiet wasn't painful the way I'd expected but was instead something I could shape, fill up with choices that were entirely my own. I started going to the farmer's market on Saturday mornings, something I'd always wanted to do and had somehow never made time for. I repainted the guest room a deep, warm green and turned it into a reading room. I signed up for a pottery class with my neighbor, who turned out to be genuinely funny and who introduced me to 3 other people who became important. My best friend and I didn't speak for 4 months. It was the longest we'd gone without talking since we were 19 years old. She sent me a letter in October, handwritten, 6 pages. She didn't make excuses. She explained things without trying to justify them. She said she understood if I needed the distance to be permanent, and that she hoped it didn't have to be. I read it twice and put it away and thought about it for 3 weeks. She and the man she'd been engaged to still don't speak. He moved back to his home state eventually, which is what he'd wanted to do before he moved for her, and from what mutual friends say, he seems to be doing all right. He's working at the kind of company he always wanted to work for. He bought a dog. He seems like someone who is in the process of building something good. I think about him sometimes when I'm in my green reading room, grateful that he didn't spend years inside a marriage that wasn't true. Grateful that a woman who almost talked herself out of it a dozen times decided to write a note and slide it under a hotel door anyway. I think about how many people every day don't do that. Who see something and look away because it's not their business, because it's too complicated, because the right moment keeps passing. How many ceremonies proceed because nobody slipped the right note under the right door at the right hour. I keep her letter in the drawer of my nightstand. I haven't written back yet. But I haven't thrown it away either, which I think means something, though I'm still figuring out exactly what. What I do know is this: the hardest thing isn't finding out the truth. The truth, once you have it, is just something you have to deal with. The harder thing is choosing what to do with it once you do. You can carry it quietly, let it harden into something bitter and closed. Or you can take a breath in the middle of a vineyard in winter and start deciding what you actually want the next part of your life to look like. I chose the second one. I'm still choosing it every morning. And if you're watching this because something in your gut is telling you to pay attention, please trust it. Instincts aren't fear. They're information. And sometimes the most important door you'll ever open is the one you almost walked past. If this story stayed with you, hit the like button and tell me in the comments, would you have read the note or thrown it away? And make sure you're subscribed to the Concealed Bonds because there are more stories like this one waiting for you, stories about the things we almost missed and the ones we were brave enough to face. I'll see you in the next one.